The robotic voice from the kiosk was the only calm thing in the screaming chaos of the afternoon. Transactions declined. Insufficient funds. Access denied. It boomed with a digital indifference that seemed to cut right through the humid air. I sat inside the reinforced steel booth, watching the scene unfold through bulletproof glass that I had installed only 48 hours ago. Outside, a sleek white Mercedes was idling aggressively against the yellow and black barrier arm, its engine purring with a restrained power that matched its owner. Behind it, a line of luxury vehicles stretched back nearly a quarter of a mile, a snake of polished chrome and frustration baking in the afternoon sun. Horns were blaring, a discordant symphony of entitlement, but the woman standing outside my booth ignored them all. Marilyn St. Clair looked like she had been carved out of ice and dressed in a light blue suit that probably cost more than the truck I drove. She was screaming at a sheriff's deputy, her manicured hands chopping the air with violent precision. I watched her face. It was a masterpiece of modern surgery, tight and flawless. But at this moment, the mask was slipping. Beneath the rage, there was panic. Genuine, terrified panic. "You cannot keep me here!" she shrieked, her voice cracking in a way that ruined her carefully cultivated accent. "This is kidnapping! That man is holding us hostage! I will have his badge and I will have his land!" The deputy looked exhausted. He rested a hand on his belt, shifting his weight away from her. "Ma'am, he isn't keeping you," the officer said, his voice flat. "You are free to walk away any time you like. But your vehicle is currently attempting to traverse a private toll road. If you want the car to move, you have to pay the toll." Marilyn turned toward my booth. Her eyes met mine through the glass. For a second, the anger vanished, replaced by a look of such profound, ancient hatred that it made the hair on my arms stand up. She mouthed the words, "I will bury you." I leaned forward, pressed the intercom button, and let my voice drift out over the speakers, calm and steady. "I'm not burying anyone, Marilyn, but the past has a way of collecting interest, and the price of admission today is $500. Quick check-in before the chaos escalates. Where are you watching this showdown from? Drop your country in the comments." To understand why a woman in a $4,000 suit was about to lose her mind over a toll booth, you have to understand that I am not a developer. I am not a lawyer. I am a logistics risk analyst, retired. For 15 years, my job was to look at billion-dollar supply chains moving through war zones and find the one choke point that nobody else saw. I found the weak bridges, the corrupt border guards, the single stretch of highway that could starve an army if it washed away. I spent my life looking at maps and seeing the invisible lines of power. So when I was looking for a place to disappear 3 weeks ago, I wasn't looking for a view. I was looking for leverage. The county auction was held in a basement room that smelled of damp concrete and desperate optimism. I stood in the back, wearing a faded hat and boots that still carried dust from overseas. The other bidders were soft men in hard suits, developers looking for foreclosures they could flip for a 30% margin. They laughed when the auctioneer announced Parcel 9B. "Non-buildable easement," the auctioneer droned, wiping sweat from his forehead. 12 acres, irregular shape, designated as drainage and access utility. Opening bid, 1,000. The room went silent, One of the developers, a man with a gold watch that slid up and down his wrist, chuckled. "Nobody wants a drainage ditch, pal. Skip it." But I had the survey map on my tablet. I had spent 3 nights measuring the red lines with digital calipers. Parcel 9B wasn't a ditch. It was a long, winding strip of asphalt, 50 feet wide and 2 miles long, that snaked its way from the public county highway up to the gilded gates of the most exclusive community in the state, Gilded Oaks. When the original developer built that paradise in the 50s, he had tried to be clever. To avoid paying property taxes on the road infrastructure, he had zoned the main entry road as a separate commercial easement, intending to transfer it to the Homeowners Association later. Only, he died of a heart attack before he signed the paper. The road sat in legal limbo for 60 years, technically owned by a defunct corporation, seized by the county for back taxes. 4,200, I said. The developer with the gold watch turned to look at me, sneering. "Going to pitch a tent in the mud, buddy?" he asked. I didn't answer. I just signed the check. I wasn't buying mud. I was buying the only artery feeding a beating heart of wealth. I drove out there the next afternoon, hauling my 30-foot Airstream trailer behind my truck. The road was pristine, maintained by the HOA who thought they owned it. It wound through oak trees and manicured grass, climbing steadily until it reached the massive iron gates of Gilded Oaks. I didn't try to enter their community. I pulled my trailer onto the wide, grassy shoulder of the road I now owned, about 100 yards down from their gate. I jacked up the wheels, leveled the frame, and sat down on my folding chair. The silence was the first thing I noticed. It was a heavy, expensive silence, the kind you buy with 7-figure mortgages. I pulled my wallet out and slid a small, charred photograph from the hidden fold. It was half-burned, the edges black and brittle. The face in the picture was young, smiling, unaware of the fire that would come later. Elara. Even after 20 years, looking at her smile felt like swallowing broken glass. I had bought this land to be alone, to let the static in my head settle down. I didn't want to fight. I wanted to disappear, but the world doesn't like it when you stop moving. The first visitation happened the next morning at 8 a.m. sharp. I was drinking black coffee, watching a hawk circle the thermal currents, when I heard the electric whine of a high-end golf cart. It zipped down the road from the main gates, moving with aggressive speed. The driver slammed on the brakes right in front of my camp, kicking up gravel that hit the side of my Airstream. Marilyn St. Clair stepped out. I didn't know her name then, but I knew her type. I had seen warlords in foreign countries with less arrogance in their stride. She was wearing tennis whites that had never seen a court and sunglasses big enough to weld in. She walked up to my perimeter, her heels clicking on the asphalt. "My asphalt. You need to move this heap," she said. No greeting. No question. Just a command delivered with the absolute certainty that it would be obeyed. She didn't look at me. She looked at the trailer as if it were a stain on her dress. Gilded Oaks has a strict appearance code. We don't allow squatters, and we certainly don't allow... She waved a hand at my truck, which still had mud on the wheel wells. "Whatever this is." I took a sip of coffee. "Morning to you too," I said. "I'm not in Gilded Oaks, I'm outside your gate." "This is the approach road," she snapped. "It is part of the visual experience of our community. I am the HOA president. I govern everything you can see from those gates. You have 30 minutes to hitch this trash up and leave, or I'm calling the tow truck, and I'll bill you for the removal. I looked at her then, really looked at her. Her face was tight, the skin pulled back in a way that erased any natural lines of age. It was a beautiful face, technically, symmetrical, flawless, but it was stiff. It looked like a mask worn by someone who had forgotten what was underneath. "I'm parked on private property, ma'am," I said, my voice low. "I usually charge for parking, but I'll give you a pass this morning since we're just meeting." She laughed. It was a cold, dry sound, like dead leaves skittering on pavement. "Private property? This is our road. You are delusional. 30 minutes. She pulled out a phone and snapped a picture of my license plate. Then she looked at me again, and for a second, the sunglasses slipped down her nose. Her eyes narrowed. She stared at me, not with annoyance, but with a sudden, intense scrutiny. Her hand froze on the steering wheel of the golf cart. "You," she whispered. "You always think the world waits for you, don't you?" The coffee cup stopped halfway to my mouth. That phrase, it wasn't a common idiom. It was specific. It was something Alara used to say to me when we were 18, sitting on the hood of my first car, looking at the stars over our tiny hometown. "You think the world waits for you, Brecken, but it doesn't. It moves." I stared at this plastic woman in her designer clothes. There was no recognition in my eyes, only confusion. "Do I know you?" I asked. She flinched. It was subtle, a tiny spasm in her jaw. But I saw it. She shoved her sunglasses back up, hiding her eyes. "You're nobody," she spat. "Just another piece of trash the wind blew in." She stomped on the accelerator, and the golf cart whined away, tearing back up the hill toward the safety of her gates. I sat there for a long time, the coffee going cold in my hand. "The world waits for you." The words hung in the air, heavier than the humidity. I shook it off, coincidence. It had to be. Alara was gone. That life was gone. But peace didn't last. The escalation began exactly 24 hours later. I woke up at 2 a.m. to the blinding wash of LED floodlights. Red and blue strobes were bouncing off the aluminum skin of my trailer, disorienting and violent. I rolled out of my bunk, grabbing the heavy flashlight I kept by the door, my heart hammering a rhythm I hadn't felt since my last deployment. I kicked the door open and stepped out. 3 massive red SUVs were parked in a phalanx around my trailer, blocking me against the tree line. On the side of each vehicle, in gold reflective lettering, were the words, HOA Security. These weren't rent-a-cops in polyester uniforms. These were men in tactical vests, combat boots, and utility belts that looked far too heavy for suburban patrol. They were putting a yellow boot lock on the wheel of my truck. "Hey!" I shouted, shining my light into their faces. "Get away from the vehicle!" A figure stepped out from behind the wall of SUVs. It was Marilyn. She was wearing that light blue suit, illuminated by the harsh glare of the headlights. She looked like a ghost overseeing a raid. She held a clipboard against her chest. "We've fined you $1,000 for illegal camping," she recited, her voice carrying easily over the idling engines. "500 for an unsightly vehicle, 200 for aggressive attitude. Since you have no address on file, we are seizing the vehicle as collateral against the debt." I scanned the perimeter. 4 guards, 2 drivers, Maryland, 7 hostiles. I wasn't armed, not visibly, but I was analyzing the geometry of the situation. They had made a mistake. They had parked the heavy SUVs on the asphalt shoulder, my shoulder. They were standing on the road, my road. "You're making a mistake," I said, keeping my hands visible but my posture loose. "You don't have jurisdiction here. And those bootlocks? That's tampering with private property." Marilyn stepped closer, stopping just outside the reach of my flashlight beam. "I am the jurisdiction," she hissed. "You think because you parked on the shoulder you're safe? We have a contract with the county to maintain order on all approach vectors. You are a blight, and I remove blights." She signaled to the lead guard. "Lock it up. If he resists, detain him for trespassing." I didn't fight. I didn't shout. I stood there and watched them clamp the steel boot onto my tire. I watched them paste a bright orange sticker on my windshield that read, "Violation, tow order." I watched Marilyn smile, a thin, triumphant curvature of her lips that didn't reach her eyes. "You can appeal in person at the HOA board meeting," she said. But I wouldn't bother. "The board is me." As they packed up to leave, the lead guard, a man with a neck thick enough to stop a shovel, leaned in close to me. "She said, 'Leave or die, pal,'" he whispered. "Next time we won't bring the boots. We bring the matches." They drove off, the red taillights disappearing into the darkness, leaving me standing in the dust of my own road. I knelt down and examined the boot lock. Cheap alloy. I could cut it off in 5 minutes with an angle grinder. But that wasn't the point. The point was the threat. "Leave or die." And that phrase again, "The world waits for you." It was gnawing at me. I went back inside the trailer, but I didn't sleep. I sat at my small dinette table, opened my laptop, and powered up the satellite uplink. I needed to know who I was fighting. I started with the public records. Marilyn St. Clair, widow of Richard St. Clair, a pharmaceutical tycoon who died 7 years ago in a boating accident. She inherited everything: the estate, the portfolio, the position as HOA president of Gilded Oaks. But when I tried to look back further, the trail went cold. Dead cold. There was no marriage certificate filed in the state. No birth certificate for Marilyn St. Clair that matched her age. No high school yearbooks. No college transcripts. It was as if she had materialized out of thin air in 2005, fully formed, holding a martini glass. This is where the gray hat comes on. I have skills from my old life. Digital keys to back doors that most people don't know exist. I wasn't proud of it. But when men in tactical gear threaten to burn you out, you stop worrying about the terms of service. I started digging into the medical databases, looking for the physical signature. Faces can change, names can change, but bone structure leaves a paper trail. I cross-referenced the timeline, 2003 to 2005. I looked for expensive, high-end reconstruction surgeries paid for by shell companies. It took me 4 hours. As the sun started to bleach the sky gray in the east, I found it. A scanned invoice from a private clinic in Zurich. Total facial reconstruction, craniofacial restructuring. The patient was listed only as ED. The bill was paid by a charitable trust linked to Richard St. Clair's company. Attached to the file was a before photo, used for surgical planning. The face was badly damaged, scarred by massive trauma, likely a high-impact collision. But the eyes. I zoomed in on my eyes. One was slightly lower than the other, a genetic quirk, a speck of green in the hazel. I stopped breathing. The laptop screen blurred. I reached for the charred photo in my wallet and held it up to the screen. The eyes were the same. E.D. Ilara Davis, my Ilara. The girl I had left standing in the rain 20 years ago. The girl I thought had moved on, married a dentist, and forgotten me. The realization hit me like a physical blow to the chest, knocking the wind out of me. She wasn't dead. She wasn't happy. She was Marilyn. She had survived the accident that had taken her face, and she had rebuilt herself into a monster of plastic and power. And she hated me. She didn't just want me off the road. She wanted to destroy me because she thought I had destroyed her. She didn't know. She couldn't know. I had written the letter. I had explained everything. The deployment, the danger, the reason I couldn't say goodbye to her face because if I did, I would never have left. And if I stayed, the people hunting my unit would have found her too. I had tucked that letter into page 42 of her favorite copy of The Great Gatsby, the one she kept on her nightstand. I assumed she found it. I assumed she read it and hated me for leaving, but understood why. But if she was doing this, if she was looking at me with that ancient hatred, she never found the letter. If you're realizing this is more than just an HOA fight, hit that subscribe button to see how deep the rabbit hole goes. The sun was fully up now. The anger that had been simmering in my gut cooled into something hard and sharp. She had sent goons to my home. She had threatened to burn me out. She was using the power of her HOA like a personal weapon of vengeance. She thought she was fighting a squatter. She didn't know she was fighting the man who used to map supply lines for sieges. I stood up and walked outside. The boot lock was still on my wheel. I looked up the road toward the opulent gates of Gilded Oaks. I saw the traffic starting to flow. Landscapers, housekeepers, delivery trucks, all using my asphalt to service her kingdom. She wanted a war? Fine. But I wasn't going to fight her with fists, and I wasn't going to fight her with lawyers, not yet. I was going to fight her with logistics. I was going to cut the supply line. I spent the morning clearing the brush along the edges of the road where it met the county highway. I measured the width again, 50 feet exactly. I marked the boundaries with orange spray paint. Then I got in my truck, using the spare tire to replace the booted one, and drove into town. I went to a heavy equipment rental yard and then to an industrial supply store. I maxed out 2 credit cards. When I came back, I had a flatbed truck following me. On the back were concrete Jersey barriers, a high-speed automated traffic arm, a solar generator, and a kiosk system designed for parking garages. I worked through the afternoon, sweat soaking through my shirt. I bolted the traffic arm into the asphalt. I wired the sensors. I set up the concrete barriers to funnel traffic into a single lane. I programmed the kiosk. By 5 p.m., the trap was set. I placed a large, reflective metal sign right at the entrance. It didn't say HOA. It didn't say Gilded Oaks. It read, The Gatsby Gate, Private Toll Road, Automated Payment Required. No trespassing without toll tag. I sat inside the booth I had constructed from reinforced steel panels and bulletproof glass. Leftovers from a government surplus sale I'd picked up years ago for a project I never finished. I powered up the system. The traffic arm lowered with a mechanical hum, blocking the only road in or out of the community. The red light on the kiosk blinked to life. I watched the first car approach. It was a Lexus, driving fast, heading home for the evening. The driver saw the barrier and slammed on the brakes. He honked. I did nothing. He honked again, longer this time. Then the cars started to pile up behind him. 1, then 3, then 10. The line stretched back toward the highway. People were getting out of their cars, confused, angry, pointing at the sign. And then I saw the white Mercedes coming down the hill from the inside of the community. Marilyn. She was trying to leave, probably heading to a dinner reservation she couldn't be late for. She drove around the line of incoming traffic, driving in the wrong lane, and pulled right up to the barrier on the exit side. She laid on the horn. I watched her through the glass. She was furious, her mouth moving in silent screams. She banged on the steering wheel. She grabbed her phone and made a call. 3 minutes later, the red SUVs appeared again, sirens wailing this time, racing down the hill to back her up. But they couldn't get to me. The concrete barriers I had placed formed a choke point. They were stuck behind her Mercedes. She got out of the car. She stormed up to the booth, her heels clicking violently on the pavement. She hammered her fist against the glass. "What is this?" she screamed, her voice muffled by the thick polycarbonate. "Open this gate immediately. Do you know who I am?" I pressed the intercom button. "I know exactly who you are," I said, my voice amplified by the loudspeaker I had mounted on the roof. "You're a motorist on a private commercial easement, and you haven't paid the toll." "This is illegal!" she shrieked, her face twisting into that mask of rage I had seen the first day. "I will have you arrested. I will tear this booth down with my bare hands." "You can try," I said calmly, "but this is a recognized business now. I filed the LLC paperwork this morning, Gatsby Logistics. If you touch the equipment, it's felony destruction of commercial property. If your guards touch me, it's assault." That was when she called 911. I watched her pacing back and forth, screaming into her phone, pointing at me, pointing at the line of cars. She was telling them there was a hostage situation. She was telling them there was a madman blocking emergency access. She was lying, and she was doing it with the desperate energy of someone who feels control slipping away like sand. The deputies arrived 10 minutes later, sirens cutting through the evening air. They had to park on the highway and walk up because the road was completely gridlocked. I saw the lead deputy, a man I recognized from the town diner, walking toward the booth. He looked annoyed. He walked past Marilyn, who was trying to grab his arm, and tapped on my window. I rolled down the document slot. "Evening, deputy," I said. "Sir, you're creating a public disturbance," the deputy said, shouting over the noise of 50 car horns. "You need to lift this gate. You can't block a residential street." "It's not a residential street," I said, sliding a thick document through the slot. "It's a private commercial easement. Parcel 9B. Check the county surveyor's stamp on page 3. It was never transferred to the HOA. I bought it at auction 3 weeks ago. It's my driveway, and I've decided to turn it into a toll road." The deputy took the paper. He turned on his flashlight and read it. He flipped to page 3. He looked at the map. He looked at the road. He looked back at the paper. Then he sighed, a long, deep exhale of a man who realized his paperwork just tripled. He turned to Marilyn. "Ma'am," the deputy said, "he's right. This isn't a public road, and it's not HOA property. It's private land. Marilyn froze. The color drained from her face, leaving the makeup looking stark and artificial. "That's impossible," she whispered. "We've maintained this road for 20 years. We planted those trees. It's ours." "Adverse possession doesn't apply to commercial easements held by the county for tax default," I said over the intercom. "My lawyer was very clear on that." Marilyn spun around to face me. "You planned this," she hissed. "You sat there in that trailer and planned this." "I did," I said. "Just like you planned to tow my home. Just like you planned to send your goons to threaten me. But here we are. The toll is $500, Marilyn. For everyone else, it's $5. But for you, for the HOA president, it's a premium rate." "I will not pay you a dime," she screamed. "I will sit here until hell freezes over." "Suit yourself," I said. "But the meter is running, and you're blocking your neighbors." Behind her, a guy in a convertible Porsche stood up and shouted, "Just pay the man, Marilyn. I have ice cream melting in the trunk." The crowd started to turn. They weren't mad at me. I was just a guy with a toll booth. They were mad at the woman who had failed to secure the one road into their fortress. They were mad at the HOA president, who had spent their dues on manicured flower beds, but forgot to buy the pavement under them. Marilyn looked at the angry faces of her subjects. She looked at the deputy, who was shrugging his shoulders. She looked at me, safe behind my glass. She realized, perhaps for the first time in her new life, that money couldn't scream this problem away. She walked back to her Mercedes. She got in. She pulled up to the kiosk. I watched her hand tremble as she reached out with her platinum credit card. She swiped it. The machine beeped. Transaction approved. The gate arm lifted. As she drove through, she didn't look at me. She stared straight ahead, her knuckles white on the steering wheel. But I knew this wasn't over. This was just the opening shot. She had lost a battle. But the war was personal now. She wasn't fighting for a road anymore. She was fighting to keep the mask from falling off completely. And I was the only one who knew what was underneath. I watched her taillights disappear up the hill. "Welcome home, Alara," I whispered to the empty booth. "Welcome home." The silence that settled over the road after Marilyn's taillights vanished was not the silence of peace. It was the heavy, pressurized silence of a trench before a mortar attack. I sat in the booth, the hum of the server cooling fans the only sound in the darkness, and replayed the look on her face. Fear. Pure, unadulterated fear masked by rage. She wasn't afraid of the toll fee. $500 was lunch money to a woman like Marilyn St. Clair. She was afraid because I had touched the one thing she couldn't buy her way out of, her control. But there was something else, something deeper that gnawed at the edges of my analyst brain. It was the way she had looked at me before the anger took over. It was the look of a ghost realizing it had been seen. I didn't sleep that night. I kept the perimeter lights on, flooding the asphalt with harsh white illumination. My laptop screen glowed with the flow of data I was pulling from the public ether. If Marilyn was Alara, and my gut, honed by 15 years of calculating survival odds, told me she was, then the transformation required resources. Massive resources. You don't erase a human being and build a new one from scratch without a paper trail. The surgery I had found in Zurich was just the physical architecture. The legal architecture was harder to build. Identity fraud on that scale required bribes, forged documents, and a mountain of cash that couldn't be traced back to a poor girl from a Rust Belt town. By 3 a.m., I had found the anomaly. It wasn't in her personal accounts, which were shielded by layers of trusts and shell companies. It was in the HOA financials. Gilded Oaks was a wealthy community, collecting millions in dues annually for security and beautification. But when I overlaid the HOA's capital expenditure reports with satellite imagery of the community over the last decade, the math didn't work. They had billed $4 million for a wetlands preservation project in 2018. I pulled up the satellite history. The wetlands hadn't been touched. The money had vanished into a consulting firm in the Caymans. And the sole signatory on that account? Marilyn St. Clair. Holy cow, I whispered to the empty booth. She wasn't just a tyrant. She was an embezzler. She had built her new face and her new life by siphoning the wealth of the very people she lorded over. And she had done it all to bury Alara Davis, the girl she thought I had destroyed. The retaliation began at dawn. It didn't come with sirens this time. It came with suits. A black sedan pulled up to the gate, and a man with a briefcase stepped out. He walked to the window, sliding a thick envelope through the slot without a word. Emergency injunction, the document header read. It was a cease and desist order filed in the county court, claiming my toll booth presented an imminent threat to public safety and demanded immediate removal. It was signed by a judge whose name I recognized from Marilyn's holiday party photos on social media. She was calling in favors. I didn't panic. I scanned the document and emailed it to my attorney, a man named Saul who operated out of a strip mall, but knew property law better than he knew his own children. It's a nuisance suit, Brecken, Saul told me over the phone 5 minutes later. It'll take 3 days to get a hearing. Until then, the sheriff won't enforce it without a warrant. Keep the gate down. But watch your back. She's desperate. I watched my back, but I also went on the offensive. I printed out a new sign, large block letters on a stark white background. I walked out to the Gatsby gate and bolted it right below the payment instructions. It didn't list prices. It didn't list rules. It read simply, "Welcome home, Alara." It was a psychological depth charge. If she was just a random power-tripping Karen, the name would mean nothing. She would be confused. But if she was Alara, that sign would be a declaration of war. It was the nuclear option. I sat back in the booth and waited. If you're realizing this is more than just an HOA fight, hit that subscribe button to see how deep the rabbit hole goes. The reaction was visceral and immediate. At 4 p.m., just as the afternoon rush was beginning, the white Mercedes came tearing down the hill. She didn't slow down this time. She didn't honk. She drove straight for the gate arm, accelerating. At the last second, she swerved, screeching to a halt inches from the concrete Jersey barrier. She burst out of the car, leaving the door open, her light blue suit flashing in the sun like a distress signal. She didn't march this time. She ran. She ran right up to the glass, slamming her palms against it, her face twisted into a rictus of terror and fury. "Take it down!" she screamed, her voice shredding her throat. "Take that name down right now! How dare you! How dare you use that name!" I leaned into the mic. "Why does it bother you, Marilyn? It's just a name, unless it's yours." "I am Marilyn St. Clair!" she shrieked, tears streaming down her face, cutting tracks through the foundation. "Alara is dead. You killed her. You left her in the rain to rot while you played soldier. You think you can come back here 20 years later and mock me? I built this world. I own this town. I will not let you drag me back to the dirt." The confession hung in the air, amplified by my loudspeakers for the line of cars behind her to hear. She had admitted it. She wasn't speaking as a stranger anymore. She was speaking as the girl I had left behind. The neighbors getting out of their cars exchanged confused glances. They didn't understand the history, but they understood the madness. They were watching their queen unravel. "I didn't kill her, Alara," I said, my voice soft but firm. "And I didn't leave her to rot. I wrote you a letter. I explained everything. The deployment orders came down in an hour. I couldn't call. I couldn't come to you without putting a target on your back. I put the letter in the book. Page 42 of The Great Gatsby. I told you to wait for me." She froze. Her hands were still pressed against the glass, but the strength went out of them. She slumped against the booth, sliding down a few inches. "Liar," she whispered, but there was no heat in it. "There was no letter. I checked every day." "Did you open the book?" I asked. I couldn't," she stammered, her eyes darting wildly. "It hurt too much. I threw it in a box. I burned everything else, but I couldn't burn that book. It's in the attic." "Then the letter is still there," I said. "And for 20 years, you've been building a fortress of hate on a foundation of silence. You stole millions. You bullied innocent people. You mutilated your own face. All because you didn't turn a page." The realization hit her like a physical blow. She staggered back, clutching her chest. But before she could respond, the sound of sirens cut through the air. This wasn't the sheriff. This was a black, unmarked sedan followed by 2 state trooper vehicles. They navigated through the line of stopped cars, driving on the grass shoulder to reach the gate. 2 men in suits stepped out of the black sedan. FBI. I had forwarded the forensic accounting file to a contact in the bureau 6 hours ago. Embezzlement across state lines, wire fraud, identity theft. It was a federal buffet, and Marilyn St. Clair was the main course. "Marilyn St. Clair?" the lead agent asked, holding up a badge. "Or is it Alara Davis? We have a warrant for your arrest regarding the misappropriation of funds from the Gilded Oaks Homeowners Association and multiple counts of identity fraud." Marilyn looked at the agents, then at me, then at the neighbors who were now filming the entire scene with their phones. The mask didn't just slip, it shattered. She looked small. The expensive suit looked like a costume she had stolen. "This is nonsense," she whispered, backing away toward her car. "I am the president. You can't touch me. I have friends. I have money." "Your assets have been frozen as of an hour ago, ma'am," the agent said, stepping forward with handcuffs. "Please turn around." She didn't turn around. She looked at me one last time through the glass. The hate was gone. In its place was a vast, crushing hollowness. She had won the game of life, or so she thought, only to find out she had been playing against a ghost that loved her. "I waited," she choked out. "I waited for a year, and you never came." "I was in a POW camp for 18 months, Alara," I said. "When I got out, they told me you were dead, killed in a car wreck. I mourned you for 2 decades. The agent took her arm. She didn't resist. She let them click the metal cuffs onto her wrists. The sound was sharp and final, echoing off the steel of my toll booth. As they led her away, she looked back at her white Mercedes blocking the lane. "My car," she mumbled. We'll have it impounded as evidence, the agent said. No, I interrupted. I opened the door of the booth and stepped out. The evening air was cool. Let her drive it out. She's not a flight risk. She has nowhere to go. Let her leave through the gate. The agent looked at me, then at Marilyn, who was sagging in his grip. He nodded slowly. One trip, he said, to the station. They uncuffed her so she could drive. She got into the Mercedes. Her hands were shaking so badly she could barely find the ignition button. She pulled the car up to the kiosk. The red light blinked at her. Payment required. She looked at the screen. She looked at me standing by the barrier. She didn't have her purse. It was in the trunk, probably, or seized. She fumbled in the center console and pulled out a crumpled bill. It was a single $500 bill. A rare thing she kept for emergencies, for bribes, for moments like this. She shoved it into the bill acceptor. The machine whirred. Transaction approved. The gate arm lifted slowly. Marilyn St. Clair, formerly Alara Davis, drove through the Gatsby gate for the last time. She didn't look back. She drove slowly, defeated, a queen in exile heading toward a prison cell. The neighbors were silent. The anger they had felt toward her for the blockade had evaporated, replaced by the uncomfortable feeling of witnessing a tragedy. I walked over to the sign I had bolted up, "Welcome home, Elara," and tore it down. I folded it in half. The aftermath was messy, as these things always are. The Gilded Oaks HOA was dissolved within a week, the board members resigning in disgrace as the extent of the embezzlement came to light. A new board was formed, composed of the actual residents, the guy in the Porsche, a retired teacher, a young couple who just wanted to walk their dogs without being fined. They approached me a month later. "We can't pay the toll every time," the Porsche guy said, standing at my window. "But we recognize this is your road. We want to lease it. A monthly fee, fair market value, covering maintenance and your ownership rights." I looked at the contract. It was fair. It was enough to pay off the Airstream and buy a small cabin up north, somewhere quiet, somewhere with no gates. "Deal," I said. Before I left, I made one stop. I went to the sprawling estate that had been Marilyn's home. It was seized property now, waiting for auction. But the sheriff, who felt bad about the whole mess, let me in for 5 minutes. I went straight to the attic. It was dusty, filled with boxes of a life she had tried to hide. I found it in the corner. A cardboard box labeled old. Inside, buried under old receipts and broken trinkets, was a paperback copy of The Great Gatsby. The spine was uncracked. It looked exactly as it had the night I left it on her nightstand. My hands trembled as I picked it up. I opened it to page 42. There it was, a folded piece of notebook paper, yellowed with age. I didn't read it. I knew what it said. I knew the boy who wrote it, and I knew he was dead, just like the girl he wrote it for. I took the letter and the book out to the backyard. I stood by the elaborate fire pit Marilyn had built with stolen money. I lit a match. I watched the paper curl and blacken, the words turning into smoke. "I love you. Wait for me. The world moves, but I will stay." Smoke and ash rising into the autumn sky. "The world waited for no one," I whispered. I walked back to my truck. Barnaby, my rescue dog who had slept through most of the drama, thumped his tail on the passenger seat. I patted his head. We drove down the road, my road, one last time, and through the open gate. The kiosk beeped as I passed, a final salute. I didn't look in the rearview mirror. There was nothing back there but expensive houses and cheap ghosts. I turned onto the highway, heading west, where the roads were open and the tolls were paid in miles, not memories. If you're still here, leave a comment describing a broken mask emoji to show you made it to the end. The miles rolled under my tires, a rhythmic thumping that felt like a heartbeat returning to normal. As the silhouette of gilded oaks faded into the rearview mirror, shrinking until it was nothing more than a smudge of expensive landscaping against the horizon, I felt a weight lift off my chest that I hadn't realized I was carrying. It wasn't just the victory over a tyrant. It was the release of a 20-year-old ghost that had finally been laid to rest. The lease payments from the new Gilded Oaks board started hitting my account the next Tuesday. It was a substantial amount, enough to retire on twice over, but I didn't touch a cent of it for myself. That money carried the weight of Marilyn's arrogance, and I wanted it scrubbed clean. I routed every single dollar into a blind trust dedicated to a legal defense fund for veterans fighting eminent domain cases. It felt like the right kind of irony. Marilyn had embezzled millions to build a fortress to keep the world out. Now her legacy would pay to help people keep their own ground against people exactly like her. Barnaby rested his head on my console, letting out a long, contented sigh. We were heading north, toward the tree line and the cold, clean air of the mountains. There would be no gates where we were going, no cameras, no HOAs, no masks to wear, just the land and the truth. I adjusted my grip on the wheel, watching the sun dip below the asphalt ribbon ahead. The world hadn't waited for us. That much was true. But for the first time in a long time, I didn't mind chasing it. I was finally driving my own road.
Thanks for staying to the end. Don't forget to like and subscribe to IS Stories.